March 15, 1945. 17,500 feet above Rangoon, British Burma. The sky is a hard, washed blue, the kind that shows every rivet, every shadow on a wing. Flight Lieutenant John "Jack" Mercer squints through the tiny Perspex windscreen of his Mosquito FB Mk6, breath fogging in the thin air as the Rolls-Royce Merlins sing a bright mechanical duet beneath him. The cockpit smells of warmed varnish and oil. The wooden fuselage around his knees gives off a faint resinous scent, like a carpentry shop at dawn. Behind him, Warrant Officer Tom Hargraves keeps a steady hand on the navigation table, fingers smudged with grease and grease pencil notations. Their aircraft, serialed and nicknamed 270 Mike by the crew, rides on a promise, speed, surprise, and the peculiar faith that a plane built largely of birch and mahogany can outrun steel and flame. On the airfield below, Rangoon's patchwork of rice paddies and battered warehouses slides away. The Mosquito's twin Merlins cough into higher power, and the needle on the boost gauge hops. Mercer eases the throttles forward and feels the plane's surge. The airframe trembles with an eager, wooden heartbeat. He remembers the years of skepticism from other squadrons, the jokes about the wooden wonder. But there's no room now for jokes. Today they carry bombs and cameras, and a pair of objectives: to hit a supply depot shading the main road north, and to get home before Japanese interceptors can reach them. Far to the west, a dark bloom of smoke marks the target. Mercer keeps the Mosquito low, skimming cloud shadows to avoid radar and lookouts. At 10,000 feet, they begin the climb, wrapping themselves in sunlight and rising toward the clearer, colder strata where air equals speed and engines breathe clean. Hargraves checks his wrist. No message from HQ. The blackout means they are on their own. They fly in a taut formation of 3 Mosquitoes, the trio cutting a clean silhouette against the morning. Their wooden fuselages glint like polished chestnut. Then, like a dropped pebble sending rings through glass, the warning crackles over the wireless. Bandit, bearing 090, altitude 2,000 feet, closing fast. The word slides between them and settles. Bandit. Japanese fighters. Mercer peels his eyes toward the horizon and sees them before he hears them. 2, then 4, then the unmistakable elliptical wings and long-necked noses of Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, black silhouettes against the sun. They come in fast, impossibly nimble, engines singing with a thin, hungry note. The first Zero slices in with practiced aggression. Its pilot, Captain Hiroshi Tanaka of the 251st Kokutai, muscles his stick like a man driving hard on a curving road. He expects lumbering bombers or vulnerable reconnaissance types. He expects easy prey. What he sees instead, at first glance, is a small, sleek twin-engine shape whose nose sits low and whose shadow seems to move with a different rhythm. He laughs aloud in the cockpit, a sharp, incredulous bark. Moku, wooden toy! Back in Britain, thousands of miles from the tropic air above Rangoon, the story of that incredible escape had its roots in something far quieter. A design office in Hatfield, Hertfordshire, in 1938. It was here that Sir Geoffrey de Havilland and his small team at the de Havilland Aircraft Company sat around a polished drawing table, staring at a radical idea. While others obsessed over armor, turrets, and gunners, de Havilland proposed something heretical for the time: a high-speed, unarmed bomber. His philosophy was simple: the faster it flies, the harder it is to hit. The Air Ministry, steeped in traditional doctrine, scoffed. A bomber made of wood, with no defensive guns, seemed absurd. They called it the carpenter's folly. Yet de Havilland pressed on, convinced that speed itself could be armor. Britain was running short on aluminum and steel as the war loomed. But wood, birch, balsa, and Canadian spruce, was abundant. It could be shaped, layered, and bonded with synthetic glues that gave incredible strength. De Havilland's craftsmen, many of them piano makers and cabinet builders, brought an artisan's precision to the task. The first prototype, the DH-98 Mosquito,
emerged sleek, smooth, and astonishingly light for its size. When it flew for the first time on November 25, 1940, test pilot Jeffrey de Havilland Jr. felt something electric beneath his hands. The Mosquito climbed with effortless grace and hit 400 miles per hour, faster than most fighters in service. By the time the test flight landed, the skeptics in the Air Ministry had stopped laughing. A wooden plane had just outpaced every metal aircraft Britain possessed. The secret lay in its construction. 2 shales of molded plywood formed the fuselage, joined like halves of a walnut. Inside, a light framework carried twin Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, each producing over 1,400 horsepower. The smooth wooden skin gave it an aerodynamic purity unmatched by riveted metal planes. And because wood absorbed radar differently, the Mosquito was harder to detect, an accidental precursor to the concept of stealth. Production began under tight secrecy. Across Britain and even in Canada, small factories, furniture shops, even piano companies joined the effort. Women and civilian carpenters built pieces by hand, the nose, the tail, the curved fuselage sections, which were then shipped to final.
It was May 2nd, 1944. The monsoon season's breath already heavy over the Burmese jungle. Clouds rolled thick and green-gray, the kind that swallowed sound. At an Allied airstrip near Chittagong, a squadron of Mosquito FB Mk6 aircraft idled, their twin Merlins roaring against the walls of humidity. The mission that morning was simple on paper. Strike a Japanese convoy moving through the Sitang Valley, then photograph the results. But simplicity, in war, often hides its opposite. Squadron leader Richard "Dickie" Hughes adjusted his oxygen mask, his face set in that calm, hard look of those who had flown too many sorties to believe in luck. "Remember," he told his wingman over the intercom, "if they come for us, don't fight them, just run. Let the wood do its work." His wingman laughed softly. "Aye, sir, fastest timber in the empire." By 8:30 hours, the Mosquitoes were skimming just above the jungle canopy, mere meters from the treetops. Sunlight pierced through breaks in the clouds, illuminating flashes of river and road. Below, Japanese trucks moved in columns, small black beads threading through the green. Hughes's navigator, Flight Officer William Harris, called out wind corrections while marking the convoy's coordinates. Hughes nodded once, flicked the bomb switches, and released. The Mosquito lifted slightly as its payload dropped. A heartbeat later, a blast like cracking mountain. Earth erupted in smoke and flame, the shockwave rippling through the canopy. "Direct hit," Harris shouted. Convoy scattered. But the exultation lasted seconds. The radar warning receiver, the little black box nicknamed Monica, buzzed in frantic pulses. Hughes looked over his shoulder and saw them. 3 Mitsubishi A6M0s, sleek and deadly, diving out of cloud with the sun behind them. "Company," Harris barked. The Zeros came in screaming, all guns and sunlight, their engines clawing for a kill. Tracers cut through the humid air, orange streaks chasing the Mosquito's tail. Hughes slammed the throttles to maximum boost. The wooden fuselage shuddered under the strain, but the Merlin sang back with power. The Mosquito leapt forward, tearing through the low clouds like an arrow. The Zeros, expecting a short chase, were unprepared for what came next. Hughes leveled out at 50 feet over the river, dangerously low, where every gust could kill, and watched the airspeed climb past 380 miles per hour, then 400. The Mosquito's wooden skin flexed.
By late 1944, the Mosquito's legend had spread far beyond Burma. Allied pilots whispered its name with affection. Axis pilots spoke it with frustration and awe. On both sides of the world, its reputation carried a single, unshakable truth. You could not catch what you could not match. At RAF bases from Scotland to Ceylon, ground crews learned to treat the Mossy with a kind of reverence. Mechanics didn't rivet or weld, they sanded, glued, and varnished. Each airframe smelled faintly of sawdust and lacquer, like something born of earth rather than industry. It was a warplane made by human hands. In workshops where women leaned over fuselages with brushes, carpenters planed edges to a perfect curve, and artisans once destined for furniture work now built engines of destruction from wood and glue. The Mosquito's versatility became its legend. It bombed Berlin in broad daylight, flew precision strikes so low they tore leaves from treetops, and carried out reconnaissance missions so deep over occupied Europe that German radar operators thought their equipment was malfunctioning. In one of its most famous raids, the Amiens Prison Raid, February 18, 1944, mosquitoes flew at barely 50 feet, blasting holes in prison walls to free French resistance captives. When they pulled away, German guards hadn't even fired a shot. The attack was over before the sirens began. To the Luftwaffe, intercepting a mosquito became a dreaded assignment. Even their fastest interceptors, the Messerschmitt Met 262 jet and the Focke-Wulf Ta 152, only caught it under ideal conditions. Pilots complained bitterly in reports. The mosquito appears, bombs, and disappears before we can engage. Goering himself, fuming in 1943, famously said, "It makes me furious when I see the mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy." The British turned out a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building. But perhaps the most poetic irony came from the Japanese theater, where that same disbelief first blossomed into fear. Word of the mosquito's speed had traveled all the way to Japan's mainland command. Reports described how the wooden bomber had outrun Zeros, destroyed convoys, and vanished into cloud cover like a ghost. Engineers tried to study the wreckage of one that had crash-landed near Rangoon, only to marvel at the craftsmanship. It wasn't crude, it was elegant. Layers of plywood, bonded with precision, curves shaped by artistry rather than machinery.